Welcome back, my friends, to the CTO Demon channel. Today, this is another core curriculum talk. It's called Antegrade Wire Escalation 2. So what's the difference between this video and the first Antegrade Wire Escalation video? See link in description below. Well, the first video is really the CTO Demon style. My style, this is what I do when I'm teaching people. But before my style came about, the APCTO Club, my friends Chu Zikani, Paul Gao, Scott Harding, Ge Lui, Chen Jian, and Lim Su Tek, etc. We actually wrote an antegrade wiring paper, which is published in Heart-Lung Circulation. Now, this is published material, and so it's available to everybody. But I thought this is also difficult to read because it's in a paper, and it's much easier if we have it in a video and alongside the other video. So I decided to make a video about that paper's antegrade wiring escalation. Now that paper doesn't only have antegrade wire escalation, it also has retrograde wiring and reverse card wiring. But I'm only going to focus on the antegrade wire escalation. So altogether there will be 3 videos now on antegrade wiring. The first antegrade wire escalation, this antegrade wire escalation 2, and the 3D fluoroscopic wiring. See link in description below. So in this paper, I'm going to not summarize everything, it's too long for the video, but I'm going to pick out 12 important points. So first, there's a philosophy again in the Heart-Lung Circulation paper about wiring. And this philosophy is the importance of backup force. So if we're wiring, whether it's the proximal cap or CTO body, and the wire doesn't go, we should always increase the backup force first before we increase the penetration force of the wire. The reason for this is that if we increase the penetration force of the wire and we don't have good backup force, the wire becomes uncontrolled and dangerous, and perforations can happen. So we should always increase the backup force. This is particularly important for proximal cap puncture. If we have a tough proximal cap and we're using a Gaia check-in, for example, and we wouldn't go in, then the first thing we should do, rather than stepping up to a Conquest 12, is to improve the backup force. And we have to improve it all the way from the access site up. So if we're in a femoral, we want to use a long femoral sheath, an 8 French sheath, an 8 French guiding, use an EBU375, step up to EBU4, or AL1, step up to AL2. We need to use side branch anchoring balloon, or we use the dual lumen catheter in the side branch to improve the penetration force of the wire, and even coaxial power anchor, as mentioned in the other AWE video. So only after we increase the backup force and the wire cannot go, should we increase the penetration force of the wire. So the second point is the proximal cap morphology determines our wire choice and our strategy. This already is published in the APCTO Club algorithm paper. Again, I'll repeat it for repetition's sake, is that if you have a taper proximal cap and residual channel, which you use an XTR. If you have a taper cap but no channel, which you use an XTA. If we have a blunt cap, we should start with a Gaia second, or that type of wire. The wire choice determines by the proximal cap morphology. Proximal cap penetration is one of the most difficult part. Now the taper caps are usually easy to penetrate, but if you have a blunt cap, then it's difficult to penetrate. There's always a need to balance the ambiguity against the penetration force. If we have a blunt cap, but very clearly we can see the calcium in the vessel and we know the vessel course very clearly, in that case we're happy to use a 12-gram wire to puncture in, or even an 820, because we are sure where we're going. If we're not sure where the vessel course is, then using a high penetration force wire becomes dangerous. So we always need to balance ambiguity against penetration force. Number 4, we recommend a stepwise increase in penetration force. So when we first look at it, unless there are some clues that this is already a very tough cap, we should gradually increase penetration force and not jump straight to a high penetration force wire. Number 5, the concept of tailored shape. Now this is important for proximal cap puncture. Now again, I said the taper caps are easy, but if you have a blunt cap and you're having trouble puncture it, or you're approaching a blunt cap, it's important to tailor not only the penetration force and the backup force for that cap, but to specifically tailor the wire shape to the cap. Sometimes the cap comes off, and the low vessel is like that, it comes off 90 degrees. Then you need a 90-degree secondary bend on your conquest wire so you can penetrate in. So we should use the pre-procedural CT and also the angiogram to determine what is the angle of the proximal cap to the proximal vessel and shape the secondary bend of the wire accordingly. Number 6, step down. After we puncture proximal cap, it's important to step down because if we keep pushing a high penetration force wire down a vessel, there's increased risk of perforation. How should we step down? Well, there's 2 ways of stepping down. If we're using a microcatheter, of course, it's easy. We can just push the microcatheter down into the proximal cap, pull the high penetration force wire down, and then step down to an intermediate penetration force wire. That's okay. But if we're using a dual lumen catheter, this becomes more tricky. Because if we penetrate and only a little bit of the wire is in, when we're removing the dual lumen catheter and switching for a microcatheter, very often we find we lose the position of the penetration wire. So what we recommend in this paper is look at the angle. Because if you have a very narrow angle between the side branch and the CTO proximal cap, then there's quite a good chance you can keep the high penetration force wire in position to swap out the dual lumen. But if you have a big angle and your penetration wire is 90 degrees, then when you move your dual lumen, it's very likely that wire is going to drop out. So if you have a big angle, what we recommend is after you penetrate it with a high penetration force wire, use a pilot or a UB3 or some, that is ES, an intermediate penetration force wire, to find the hole on the dual lumen catheter of that high penetration force wire. And then you can track further down so that you have more wire length to do your exchange to a microcatheter. However, if the angle is very shallow, then you can try removing the dual lumen and just switching for a microcatheter. When we are crossing the CTO body, there are 5 aims. Number 1, we want to get to the distal cap. Number 2, we want to avoid perforating outside the vessel architecture. Number 3, if possible, we want to avoid wiring in the subintimal space. Number 4, if possible, we want to avoid enlarging the subintimal space. Number 5, we want to avoid enlarging the peri-wire space. Because if we enlarge the peri-wire space, the wire control decreases. Now, number 1 and number 2, that is getting to the distal cap and avoiding vessel architecture perforation, is very important. But number 3, 4, and 5 are negotiable. If we have a very calcified, tortuous vessel, we might abandon 3, 4, and 5 and just knuckle the wire down. Perfectly acceptable. But it's important to have in our minds these concepts of our aims of wiring across the CTO body. Number 8, we talk about the different types of wiring through the CTO body. Number 8 is loose tissue tracking. Loose tissue tracking, I think a lot of operators have tried this before, is to use an XTA type of wire, and you use more rotation and less pushing and direction, and let the wire find its own way across the CTO body. And it works quite well in a lot of cases. This is loose tissue tracking. Now, when loose tissue tracking meets resistance, okay, we've covered this in the other talk, what we should do is step up the penetration power, because when loose tissue tracking meets resistance, it means it's meeting something in the plaque. That's the right position. So we need to push the microcatheter forward to penetrate with the XTA, or step up to wire with the higher penetration force wire. The second type of wiring, point 9, is intentional intimal plaque tracking. That's wiring inside the plaque. Now, the problem with intentional intimal plaque tracking is that we need a lot of information. We need to know where the plaque is. If we don't know, we can't intentionally wire the plaque. And we can only know by 3 things. 1 is pre-procedural CT. If we know the pre-procedural CT and we know where blobs of calcium is and where the wall is and where the vessel is, we can correspond that to a fluoroscopy and wire. The second is if we have an IVUS down in the vessel in the subminimal space, then we can intentionally track the plaque with the other wire. And number 3 is if we can see a lot of calcium on fluoroscopy, then we can intentionally track. So intentional intimal plaque tracking is not always possible. It's only possible when we have knowledge of where the plaque is. In this case, we should use a Gaia-Nix type of wire, which we can direct and just track the plaque. Number 10, step up and step down. So we talk a lot about stepping up and stepping down. When we meet resistance, we should step up to higher penetration force. But when we overcome resistance and it becomes easier to wire, especially if there's a long distance between that and the distal cap. We should step back down. Because if we step back down, we can do loose tissue tracking and get all the way to the distal cap. Number 11, subintimal tracking. So we recognize not all cases we can track inside the plaque, and often we have to do subintimal plaque tracking. Subintimal tracking can be done by knuckle wiring. We knuckle a wire down and that tracks in subintimal. It can also be done with a blunt tip intermediate force wire, such as a UB3 or a Gladys ES wire. That can wire in the subintimal space because of the blunt tip, avoiding it perforating the vessel. 12, the tough distal cap. Now this has already been covered in the other talk. We said there are 4 morphologies of tough distal cap. The Washington Monument kind of sharp cap, the rounded cap, especially one with a side branch nearby, and the rounded cap with visible calcium. When we see a tough distal cap, we should step up prophylactically and not try to push an intermediate or low penetration force wire, because that's just going to slip off the cap and cause a subintimal space enlargement in the distal vessel, collapsing the distal vessel, reducing the distal vessel size, and reducing your chance of penetrating. So we step up to a high penetration force wire to penetrate the distal cap. So that is the 12 points I've taken from the heart-lung circulation paper. If you have time, do read the paper. The link is in the description below. And I hope this is helpful, and this completes the 3 core curriculum talks on antegrade wire. Of course, there's still much more antegrade material to put into here, including stingray, parallel wire, APCTO wiring, and hopefully I'm going to come to those videos later on in the series. Thank you very much for following. If you like the video, please hit like, and if you'd like to subscribe, hit the subscribe button. Hope to see you next time. Bye bye.